Hello everybody. Welcome to From Attention to Belief, the new rules of B2B creativity. I'm here with two spectacular guests and we're going to unpack the rules of B2B creativity today. I'm here with Jim Lesser, who is the Chief Brand Officer of ServiceNow, and I'm here with Jill Kramer, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at MasterCard. Jill and Jim, I'd love to get you started on what you see as the state of play in B2B creativity today. And I'm going to start with you, Jim, because I know you have very strong feelings about this.
I was going to say, you have to start with Jim on this
Welcome to our show.
I mean, I don't want it to be too much of a hot take, but I think the state of B2B creativity is not very strong, to be polite. I think, for me, it was a huge attraction to come to the world of B2B from the world of advertising, and the lure was there's so much white space and so much opportunity to do great work for such an important part of our economy. But I think, you don't have to come to Cannes to know that the tradition of great B2B creative is not very deep, and it's up to us to draw the best creative thinkers in and make them want to be a part of our brands.
Jill, do you share Jim's point of view?
So I'm going to give you a positive and a negative. I think Jim's not wrong. But I think we as marketing leaders bear a big part of the responsibility. It all starts with the assignment. There's a reason it's hard to draw good talent, because it's really hard to synthesize complicated things into simple ideas. And all too often, people give up too soon. So I think that's maybe the negative side. The positive side, I was very honored to serve on the inaugural B2B creative jury here 4 years ago. And I saw ideas. Have you been on a jury yet? Mm-mm. You need to be on the B2B jury. You will see ideas that make you believe. And they're small ideas. And you're like, why does everyone not do this? So they are there. We have to find them, and we have to seek to more deeply understand, how did you get to this great idea? Why for you were all of the barriers removed? So I think both things can be true. I have a little bit more hope, and it was a lot to do with being on that jury.
That's great.
You're not buying what I'm selling, are you? You'll believe it when you see it?
I will believe it when I see it. I think you're right. We bear the responsibility 100%.
Yeah.
I think if we're in a room of B2B marketers and we say, who here always dreamed of being in B2B, there's not a ton of hands that go up. And I think it's up to us to create that.
100%.
I mean, when I started building our team at ServiceNow, I looked for people who had worked on the great B2B campaigns, because there's not that many.
Yep.
Do you think that we have an understanding of creativity? Like, do you think that we understand when marketers talk about creativity, what exactly they mean by that? Jim, we're going to be in the Palais tomorrow talking about what systematizing creativity is about.
Yeah.
But I'm just interested from your perspective, and Jill, you were also mentioning this, like, if we can't understand what we mean by the word, how can we communicate and expect to mean the same things?
I always ask for the definition. There are certain words you always have to ask, and you and I were chatting earlier. It might be, a talent review, and that person's got such great creative ideas, and it's like, fantastic, tell me more about that. Or let's make sure we have great conditions for great creativity. Great, give me an example of what great creativity looks like, because I think the word does get batted around, and you can't create it if you don't know what you're actually trying to create. That's part one. Part two is also, like, there's a whole lot of different types of creativity, and they all play a role in getting to great work. And you need to celebrate that. And the minute you see it, name it in front of everyone. Like, that was an incredibly creative way to look at that data. That was an incredibly, creative summation of that, because you actually synthesized to a simple point. Let's talk about that. So I think, really using the word the way it's supposed to be used and not let it be bandied about definitionless is part of the task.
Yeah, I agree. The definition of the word is probably the most critical starting point. And I think of it as a creative Rorschach test that some people will say bold or breakthrough,
Yeah.
or they'll throw words around. And if you don't actually talk about, well, show me exactly what you mean.
Yes.
Show me a piece of communication, a campaign, something, then bold it's like looking at a Rorschach test where you see two faces and I see a glass of wine, and we're looking at the same thing. We're saying the same word.
Yes.
And there's something beautiful in that too, because creativity can reach different people in different ways. I was sitting at the awards ceremony last night, and the words bold and audacious were used. And I was sitting next to someone, and we looked at two pieces of work, and they leaned over and said, "Did you like any of that?" And I said, well, the second one really spoke to me, and I knew why. It had to do with a life circumstance I had been in that they really did tap into. That person may not have ever had that same point of reference. So it's a great conversation to have, and very often we're in a rush to get things made and meet deadlines and then talk about, did the work, and we don't always have those conversations about why may it have really moved one person and not another.
Yeah.
Did you mean to move one person and leave the other one out?
Right. I think I feel like I've had a big education coming to the brand side after a career in advertising, and one of the things that I've tried to build as part of our culture is that great ideas can come from anywhere. And because I started my career as the receptionist, I always say, especially the receptionist might come up with great ideas. Today I learned Jill also started as the receptionist.
What?
So great ideas can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
Great ideas can come from anywhere. Obviously, ServiceNow is one of the most innovative companies in the world, and I've been blown away by the creativity I see from people who are outside of marketing. There's a technologist who presented at our big event called Knowledge, where he was on stage in front of 20,000 people, and he presented in a way that was so beautiful, dramatic, passionate, and I looked him up on LinkedIn. He's got 3 degrees from MIT, but he also studied drama. And so here's somebody who brings the excitement out in this room of 20,000 people, and has an ability to tell a story. It's not where you would expect it to come from.
Do you think that creativity needs some constraints to stop being this kind of abstract idea that both, I think, terrifies people and also signals to them that, I don't know what Jill thinks creativity really is. If I need to persuade, impress, or engage with Jill on some level, I need to sort of understand. And I think this big abstract conceptualization is quite difficult to translate. But Jim, I think you have spent some time thinking about the constraint. What constraints are helpful?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. But if we're talking about a brief for a piece of marketing that is going to have paid media behind it in some form or fashion, the constraint actually is what makes the creatives get excited. The constraint is the tighter the constraint, the more inventive I think the solution will be.
Absolutely.
But in terms of what you were saying about how do people know what Jill or Jim want to see in a piece of work, I think that only comes through repetition. It only comes through kind of creating enough of a dialogue and a shared understanding of what you think good looks like, because especially in the AI age, we've defined the human element as taste, and taste defines the brand, and the brand is the moat. So the taste part has to be described elaborately over time in dialogue with your partners and your creative team and your strategists and everyone. Because otherwise they would say, is this good? We have an idea.
Yes, that's exactly, that is the situation that I think is quite difficult to evaluate.
I also think the fact that you don't want to decode for one person. This is what Jim likes, therefore I had a job, and I remember I had this great piece of work I couldn't wait to show to my boss's boss. And someone was like, no, they won't like that because, and there was a color reference made. And I was like, that's so fascinating to me. So I say in casual hallway conversation, so I hear you like really have like it's allergic reaction to this color. And they were like, what? Like never Never actually been discussed. But people can, then they get reactive. Jim will like this. What if Jim's not the target audience? What if Jill's not the target audience?
Yeah.
I once did an exercise back at our old shared employer where it was like, okay, the brief is the best coffee cake, the best crumb cake in New York City. Go out and find it. Some people came with like a raspberry layer. Other people came with a chocolate layer. Someone was like, my brief for the best crumb cake is the ratio of cake to crumb and how much butter is in that baby. So like, it's different for everyone, but are you creating the conditions? And to your point about today you can say there are certain things that are inextricable for the fact that this is a coffee cake and it will meet this need.
That's exactly it.
But the varieties of it can be numerous because you like fruit and you like chocolate and you like a lot of butter. And we can now do both. So I think to your point, there's constraint in what is the core thing that will never move. And then where's all the beautiful variation? And there's creative in both of those things.
Yeah. And to bring it back to B2B, I think the dynamics of the long buying cycle of a lot of B2B industries means that you create far more content than a lot of other industries, right? If you're selling candy bars, it might be a lot of awareness level advertising, and then your shelf space is the most important thing that's going to deliver results. In B2B, you have to have this ongoing long buying cycle. It could be 12 months, it could be 24 months. And so it creates the need for more content. So, I mean, the way we've approached it is to learn from the systems that we think are most applicable to our industry. So, you know, when you come to a tech company and you say, we're going to redefine the brand, if you say, what brand do you want to be like in a tech organization? I guarantee almost everyone's going to say the same thing, and it's a fruit. That's a name. And, you know, surprise, surprise, it's a totally different business, the way it's structured. And in our case, we studied the insurance industry, actually, the consumer insurance industry, because the way that the buying cycle work is more akin to that than being able to walk into a store and buy a beautiful object.
Yes.
And so we looked at the insurance industry and some of the world's biggest marketers.
It's a relatively abstract concept as well. You know, it's
relatively abstract concept. Group buying dynamic, if you consider the household.
Yes.
Long buying cycle, relatively hard to point a camera at it and say, you know, this is the thing. And so we looked at those biggest insurance brands and said, what do they have in common? Well, they all tell their brand story through characters. And so we created what we think of as not just a campaign, but a system where we have a CEO who's played by the talented and wonderful Idris Elba, who is very much an avatar for our dynamic, charismatic CEO, Bill McDermott. And then we have a cast of characters around him who represent our buying groups. And this gives us the ability to create a system so that when we get into that content that's deeper in the funnel than just awareness, and we need to, in 2 minutes or 3 minutes, explain a layer deeper about what is the technology doing, what is the ServiceNow platform giving you, what are the promises. We can do that with this cast, and we can speak to the buying groups. They see themselves in it. So it's more, it's kind of maybe an unusual solution to the challenge of a lot of B2B tech marketers.
And I think there's a lot of beauty in that system and the solve that ServiceNow has done, because some B2B brands don't get the support and the budgets to do a memorable upper funnel that will establish that content layer. But the insight plus the rigor plus the recognition of multiple audiences, like, one of the great things is how can you apply some of those really good lessons, even if you're in a different situation where maybe you don't have the advocacy of the CEO, maybe you don't have the budget for A-level talent, but there's a beauty in the rationale. It was well thought out. It was validated by outside in, but also highly applicable category. And I think that there's such a shortage in B2B of bridging any big idea to the actual content experience. Sometimes just getting the core idea is exhausting and you give up, and then the content is scattershot. And
often in a different team.
In a different team, and doesn't relate at all. It reflects the complexity of the organization. It does not orient around the buyer group.
That's
so those are the beautiful things that you can do even if you're not at a ServiceNow.
I mean, one
Well
of the
said.
things that was so resonant in the Idris campaign and Patty and all the artifacts and the personas and the characters, which I absolutely love, is because it really tracked to the research that we've done with LinkedIn, that we've been building around buyability, like how do you make brands more buyable? And it kind of boils down to recommendations, relationships, and relatable buying situations.
Right.
The more of those you stack into your creative campaigns, essentially, the better the results become. And we actually did a test of 700 best-in-class B2B campaign case studies that had been entered for awards. And we found that the campaigns that have 3 or more signals are actually both on awareness, mid-funnel metrics, ROI, perform better. And just even in terms of the single metric of incremental revenue to the business, you're more than twice as likely when you have 3 or more of those signals to drive incremental revenue to the business than if you have fewer. And I think what I hear in when you talk about a creative system is that we're actually trying to meet the real needs of the buying group, including the unstated ones, which is we'll buy the thing that's least likely to affect our career negatively, which is not as stated as you think it might be.
Right.
It's
Right.
a very internal motive and a hidden need. But once you understand that's what you're solving for,
Yeah.
you understand that I need to be able to help people defend the decision that they're making.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's very different. B2B for me is different because the buying group is a group of individuals who sort of regress to the mean of the safest decision. However way you want to try and believe that your champion wants this and that, they're actually going to regress to the mean of the most agreeable decision. And to some extent, that's what we're selling, a decision that is easy to agree on.
Right.
And that's quite different. I mean, both of you have had very kind of storied careers in B2B and in B2C. Do you think is it like, how is arguing for creativity in B2C compared to in B2B? And what more wrappers do you have to put around creativity in B2B to actually get to make the investment case? Jill, you are like MasterCard is an iconic brand. You've built those platforms. How do you see that difference?
I think really there's a couple of things that are outside of the B2B and B2C, and that is the role of the brand in the company culture. Because it's not necessarily, and tell me if you disagree, easier to be B2C if you still have a challenged company where the investment is not seen, where the expertise is not recognized. But the buying cycle differences can reward faster. So you can have a conversation where you don't necessarily need the same level of stamina, and the buying audiences are broader, so you can talk about, that you need things like awareness, that you need multi-channels, whereas it's really easy in B2B to go directly to the sale, as if all of the conditions that you just mentioned didn't exist, as if that I want to feel safe about this decision. I want to feel comfortable with it. I want to feel like I know this brand because I'm going to spend more money on it than most consumer decisions that you make. So there's a few conditions that I think exist, but I don't want to cheat to say B2C is easier than B2B because that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a few major differences when you come into B2B world that are just different dynamics. One is many companies, especially in B2B, start with something that's very demand oriented in all their marketing. Yeah. And so it's very rational and it's very, it's designed to be a trigger for response. And it oftentimes helps build the company when what the company offers is very unique. But then sometimes the company grows to a place where you need more than that, right? Very common in technology. That's one big thing. The other big thing is the group dynamic that you talked about. And I think great marketers always are fascinated by psychology. And when you get into a group dynamic of psychology, you add dimensions to that you aren't thinking about when you're talking about a one-on-one product and sale, right? We're all in the behavior.
You cannot get to those behaviors if you assume logic and rational behavior.
Right.
actually are ruling the decision making.
Yeah.
Right.
That's actually for me the fascinating gap.
Yeah. And we're all in the behavior change business, right?
Yes.
And getting someone to change their brand of toothpaste is really hard. Getting them 20 people to agree on what to have for lunch, if they can only choose one type of pizza,
Yeah.
is very hard.
Yeah.
Getting them to agree on a multi-million-dollar software decision is
Yeah.
extremely hard.
Yeah.
And one of my mantras talking about the shift we're trying to make is that it's very rational for us to be emotional. Because oftentimes with B2B, you have a lot of people involved in the decision making of what's our promise. And a group dynamic often reverts to the rational.
Yeah.
And so the marketing science that we all know is that people make decisions based on emotion. And people, if you can make them laugh or make them cry, you are definitely more likely to be remembered and to be triggered when they go into the day one list. So we've tried to use that.
The other thing that people don't talk often enough about in B2B is change. I mean, in order to grow your share, you often have to displace another provider. So the group dynamics are also affected by, this is hard. Can't we keep going with the same person? Yeah. And you want to change, but I don't. And now we're like, so the group dynamics that we've been talking about, all true. But if you're flipping a provider, and then you also, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, is you have to also retain those providers so they're not flippable by someone else. And I don't think there's enough conversation about those dynamics in B2B. Those are all of the emotions in that group that you need to deal with. And to your point, if you're not making connections with them, then they're all left to their own devices, and it's an unpleasant situation. Software shifts at an enterprise are a big deal.
Not only a big deal, but as you say, different parts of the buying group have a different job to do in that process.
Right.
So your deal champion is wanting innovation, they want change, they want to bring in the new exciting vendor. Right. And then you have the hidden buyers in legal, HR, finance,
procurement wants the best
one
deal.
job. To de-risk anything. We're not going to allow anything to come within the ecosystem of our business that can potentially have risk. So they have totally different different frameworks, and that's a fascinating thing. I think one of the things that I really like about the Idris campaign is obviously we love Idris, but and as a Brit, he's I love to see him going from ITV to the really big time. You see all of the different characters in your work environment in that campaign. You're either one of those characters or you need to get one of those characters on side. And just the sort of the character-based dramatic moments that you're building strike me as very, very interesting, because I kind of feel like I'm maybe watching The Office, but I'm watching, talk a little bit about how certain you were that was the right way. Like, were there other, what seems very evident now, were there doubts about it at the time, or like how did that all come together?
In some ways, the biggest doubt, if there was any, is does humor work when we're talking about something as serious as a software change for a large enterprise? And I think what we've seen in all of our testing and feedback is that people want to see them. There's an element of that's my team.
Yes.
That's our crew. Yeah. And they can visualize themselves in that story. Now, one of the big shifts I think that we've made that might be helpful is we've thought about what is the job to be done by that work. And the first job to be done is to get onto the day one list. So if we all know that there's a very small percentage of people in the market at any given moment, when they get into market, do they think of you? And if they think of you, then you're going to get on the day one list. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not now a very long process that is extremely rational and very technology oriented that you need to deliver on, right? But the job to be done is to get on the day one list. Yeah. And then the job for nurture is to make sure that the information that people are seeking, they're able to find, and hopefully they actually seek it out and they actually enjoy it, because then they're much more likely to share it with their colleague and say, hey, have you seen this thing with Patty and Kate talking about what ServiceNow can do for HR?
Yeah.
pretty fun.
Yes.
The other thing with the humor in that campaign is one of the things sometimes B2B gets bogged down in is the accurate representation of each person's role. And
Yes.
being able to actually, sometimes you're most recognizable for every role in the enterprise has like the thing they're slightly mocked for, maybe lovingly
Exactly
so.
right, yes.
And it is the fastest identification, and you went with it, which was a great move.
That's very nice of you to say. We spent a lot of time talking about that because you're right. Everyone also wants to see the idealized version of their role.
Exactly.
But
Sometimes that's unrecognizable to others, but the other one is very recognizable and still
what
lovable.
it looks like is advertising, right?
Yes.
If it's so perfectly drawn,
Yeah.
it's a persona that AI would create. It's not interesting and real and
Right.
something you see yourself in.
We need to see the quirks to accept
Yes.
people for their essential
Their humanity, yes, exactly.
And it feels like, there's like in the 90s and the 80s, there were these great kind of, like Leonard Rossiter and Joan Collins, or like we had a brand of coffee, the Gold Blend, where we had a couple, or we like the OXO family. OXO is like a stock cube. Like we kind of are very familiar with
Right.
persona-based stories that move on. In fact, the original soap operas were basically a long version of that for a little bit of that. How close are we in B2B to really embracing conceptual ideas that have actually history in advertising, but actually are, that's a setup, that's a framework that can work.
Again, I have the glass half full version of this. I think that we're closer than we think. And one of the things that's really interesting in B2B is a lot of times there's not an artifact that lives in popular culture because they go direct in.
Yeah.
And a lot of the B2B work is franchise-based or distribution-based. So you don't always have those things. So that is a difference in B2B because the audience is so well honed, you go a little deeper, but they're still great creative in the choices that they have there. And a lot of them are humor-based, a lot of them are based in quirks and realities of the situation. I just don't think we see enough of them.
Right.
Whereas you see them on the B2C side, you share them more on the B2C side. Some of it is just calling creative work what it is and celebrating it. So it didn't get a big TV budget behind it. Who cares? Mm-hmm. It was really clever. It was spot on, based on an undeniable truth, and it worked. Like, we should celebrate it a little bit more. Yeah. I mean, the fact that the first B2B creative jury was 4 years ago.
Yes. Yes.
That tells you a lot.
Tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Especially as the category is, as we know, so huge. B2B is a $27 trillion category compared to B2C, which is about $7.4 trillion. Nobody's saying that 7.4 is small, but it's not as big as 20 plus, and we need to be able to unlock that growth. I think we've had an absolutely fascinating conversation. I just want to pick up on one point that you were saying, Jim, which is there are basically two jobs in B2B for brands. You've got to get on that day one list, because if you don't make it to the end of the show. You don't come in the middle and then kind of get onto the end of the show. And then you've got to be defensible enough and credible enough within the buying group to be bought. That decision has got to be defensible internally. So we have both an external, you've got to be famous in the category, you've got to be defensible inside the buying group. Those are two beats that you've got to hit. And if we use that as kind of our platform, we kind of get to see that you've got to be discoverable. Like, people have got to know that you're there. You've got to be credible within the market, so people think of you as the obvious place. And then to win that last bit, and I think this is the bit that people miss, you've got to be buyable enough that the organization can say, yes, we're not going to take, this is the least risky, most trusted, most recommended. Mm-hmm. And I think we're kind of getting to a framework where we understand that that's the process. Yeah. I want to ask you just one really quick closeout question, so 30 seconds or less. What is the advice you would give to a B2B CMO of one thing that they can do differently to maximize the value of their creativity? It could be a bold decision, but one thing that they could do. And Jill, I think we'll go with you first.
Gosh, I think the first thing the one thing that they can do is I would go back to where we started. Name that the source of that creativity, celebrate it, and focus on it in whatever state that it is, because as I said earlier, a lot of people have very different realities. And I think nurturing that creativity from day one, name it, nurture it, and let it work for you. And hopefully there's more ServiceNow situations than there are the opposite of that, where we'll see more great work across the board.
Brilliant. Jim, close us out with some inspiring wisdom.
No pressure.
No pressure. I think the way that so many B2B companies often approach things, like we talked about, coming from the demand first, you have to get to a point, I think, where you socialize across the C-suite that what you're doing isn't as efficient as it could be. So one of the things that I hear a lot, and I heard a lot in my advertising years, was we need a bold idea. I think no CFO in the world wants to hear that they need to be brave. You need to present the science to help them understand why breaking through is more cost efficient. And that doesn't mean doing something ridiculous or silly or whatever it may be. It means, what are you going to do to actually break through? If you don't break through, then all the money's wasted. I mean, most people are more likely to be hit by lightning than to click on a direct response banner ad. So it's incredibly inefficient to think that you're going to direct market your way to greatness. And hopefully more people feel like when you actually build a brand, you can show that there is science behind the creativity. It's not just a bunch of people wearing cool clothes and flip-flops coming up with wacky ideas.
I actually think that we've kind of ended on a really strong point. So we are like really define creativity so that you know where you're going, from where you start, you have a really clear end game, and then use that the clarity of that end game to define the activities that actually are going to wrap up around it. I think thank you very much for being an amazing guest. I think we've had a really good time, and thank you for joining us very much.